hardest book of the Bible.
I want to welcome those who will be watching the video, the Moorhead Church of Christ, Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the Revelation of John, and we are going to resume our study of Revelation chapter 17. Very interesting and thought-provoking chapter. We are going to just go ahead, instead of giving sort of a summary of what we covered, we're just going to reread the first 4 verses, and then we'll go ahead and read 5 through 7, and we'll kind of go from there. So, Brian, do you want to read, if you would, read 1 through 4,
Okay.
and then Ryan, do you want to read 5 through 7?
Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of those sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 7 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding her hand a golden cup full of
Abominations.
Abominations and the impurities of sexual immorality.
And on her forehead was a name, and on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the angel said to me, "Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns."
Okay, so John sees this vision of this harlot on a beast, and what we find out is he sees the vision, he has wonder about it, and then sort of the explanation is going to come out in terms of, you know, who the harlot is, who the woman is, who the beast is, and really the many waters. All of that is going to come to light in this chapter. And we are going to just go back to, verse 5 is where we're going to go back there. And it says, "On her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth." And I did want to share with you what Hal Lindsey said. So we look at sort of the premillennial view, just because my fear is going through the book of Revelation. I would just rather totally not have to deal with premillennialism. But then sometimes, you know, brethren want to know where in the book of Revelation to get the idea of a rapture and the tribulation period and the Antichrist, and how, because you can't read it in there. It's all sort of read into it. And so what I like to do is sort of put out there sort of what premillennialists say it, what they say it means, and really just go and study it in this context and really bring out the real meaning of the text. So Hal Lindsey is one such premillennialist. In his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, he says, "Understanding the mother of harlots, or the great harlot, is important to the basic understanding of the Christian belief versus all religions. This church, which the prophet John describes, claims to be united to Christ by mystical marriage, but is really an adulteress in spiritual sense. This church professes an allegiance to God, but worships a false religious system." And so they look at this quite a bit differently in terms, they think it's just some kind of conglomerate of religions coming together. And, you know, this is sort of how they interpret their understanding of the harlot, the idea that you're having all of these false religions, and that would be the false prophet, and that they're sort of directing people to worship the beast, which to them would be the Antichrist. And so that is really the take that they have on it. But I would like to just kind of look at some of the words here and sort of explain this. The word mystery here, and that's the New American Standard, in verse 5, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, in talking about it, says the name on her forehead is Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth. This is her mystery. That is the hidden significance of her appearing. Her name holds the mystery of her power. And so we're looking at what that is, the idea that she is the mother of all harlots, and it's talking about Babylon. And recognize that Babylon was an evil nation of the Old Testament. Babylon still existed in a very less powerful mode. It was no longer a superpower. For the most part, it had been destroyed. But it sort of represents really an enemy of God's people. But it is not really talking about Babylon in the text. When we talked about it last week, we defined it as
talking about Rome.
Talking about the city of Rome, and we tied that to verse 18. It says, the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, Babylon wasn't reigning over the kings of the earth. Rome was. Remember, this is apocalyptic literature, so the idea that lots of imagery is being used in these visions John has seen, symbol is being used. So Babylon doesn't mean Babylon. It's sort of a code name for the city of Rome. Okay? So this is what we're talking about when we talk about Babylon the Great. Okay? And J.W. Roberts, in his commentary, The Revelation of John, the Living Word commentary, says, quote, several ancient writers, he mentions Seneca and another ancient writer named Juvenal, mentioned the custom of a prostitute wearing a headband on which was written her name or some descriptive phrase showing her occupation. John sees a woman representing the great city with such a name on her forehead. And so that's sort of the significance of the idea that she has it on her forehead. Verse 6 says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw, I wondered greatly. Those who are sort of premillennialists like to make the book of Revelation pretty much very, very literal. And of course, it's not meant to be literal. In other words, these are just visions. These are just visions John sees, and it's filled with the symbols and the imagery and all these different things. But if you're going to make it literally, then you have to have essentially who you think the harlot is, really literally drinking blood, the blood of saints. And so it's kind of interesting where they kind of go in and out of sort of the idea of we've got to take this literal versus figurative. Perhaps probably the biggest...
She spilled their blood.
Rome,
if you didn't get down and worship the emperor, they killed you.
Right.
And so in a sense, they're talking about spilled the saints' blood.
It's the blood of Christians.
Yeah, and she didn't actually drink their blood.
Right.
It's a figure of speech. It's,
It's the idea of bloodshed. The idea that
bloodshed.
she shed so much blood of Christians. The idea that she's sort of drunk, if you will, with the blood of saints, which that makes her that much more evil and wicked. Somebody? Oh, Brother Ernest, I'm sorry.
Yeah, when somebody's drinking, for them to get drunk, they have to enjoy it. So
Right.
basically,
Good point, excellent point. The idea that
being
you're drinking
drunk,
so
and
much of it.
They enjoy killing someone.
Yep, yep, and that's, it's a real tragedy, but if you sort of study some of the things with ancient Rome, especially the time of Nero and the time of Domitian afterward, the idea that there seemed to be this bloodlust where the idea that, Christians are at our disposal, and because they won't do what we want them to do, then, we're going to use them in whatever way that we can really to torment them and to watch them die horrible deaths. And it's a terrible thing. I've mentioned the book, Fox's Book of Martyrs. We have a copy of that in the library. And what it does is it records a lot of these terrible things, you know, essentially that ancient writers were writing about that were happening to Christians, not only before Domitian, but we're talking about, you know, the centuries after that. And it seems like it just became worse and worse, okay?
Well, the Romans put Jesus on the cross too.
What that?
The Romans are the ones that nailed Jesus on the cross, I believe.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they were really just the instrument.
Yeah, I know what you're
the-
talking about.
of the-
talking about
Of the
they're the ones that-
religious leaders, the Jews,
Yeah.
yeah, and the civil leaders, yeah, yep, they did.
So-
Frank Pack in his commentary, Revelation Part 2, the Living Word series, says about the city of Rome, she has not only corrupted herself and idolatrous and lustful living, she has been crowned all of her sin by her persecution of God's people. She is like a drunkard wanting more and more blood of the saints. And that goes back to what Brother Ernest was saying. I want to just look a little bit at this phrase, and with the blood of the witness of Jesus. So I want us to understand really what this is about. The witnesses are the saints or Christians that sealed their commitment to Christ by shedding their blood at the hands of the Roman persecutors in order to remain faithful to death. Now remember that goes back to Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, where Jesus tells the church of Smyrna that they're going to incur some kind of persecution. He says, be faithful until death, and I will give you a crown of life. The idea is if you're going to follow Jesus, you might have to give up your very life. And the idea is being a witness here, according to Art Gingrich Greek English lexicon, the idea is one who became a witness in relation, in terms of a martyr. In other words, they were witness in the sense that they were martyred for Christ. John says, and when I saw her, I wondered greatly. So John is looking at this, and of course, he needs some explanation. You're seeing this, you know, this graphic picture and all this, and you know it's something, especially going back to verse 3, the idea that you're seeing the scarlet beast that is full of blasphemous names. It's some kind of evil depiction. So John is seeing this, but he's not really understanding it. Now we jumped ahead to verse 18, and we sort of decoded what Babylon meant. But see, we're not to that point yet. You know, the angel's going to explain all that. So we've kind of jumped ahead to get what that is. We want to look at the things he says here. In verse 7, it says, the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Even for us today, deal with apocalyptic kind of literature is not something that, as modern people, we understand. This is something that was very popular for a period of time in ancient times. The reason why this is being used is because all of the people that John himself is seeing this, that John is able to use this and pass this to those Christians who are persecuted. They would have a lot better understanding of it than we would. And so when we sort of study, we've got to recognize that apocalyptic literature borrows a lot of things from the Old Testament. We're going to hear phrases here and there of different things that are mentioned, and they're going to be in here. And the best way we can kind of understand it is go back into the Old Testament, understand how it was used in that passage or passages, and then really sort of bring that over and say, okay, this is what it's going to mean here as well. Well, in verse 7, Hal Lindsey, the premillennialist here in his book, There's a New World Coming, says, when the angel told John that he would tell him a mystery of the woman, he meant that this harlot, the false religious system, would have as its main teachings the same occultic practices as ancient Babylon, which would include black magic, demon contact, seances, miraculous materializations, witchcraft, astrology, and sorcery. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how you got there. I mean, I don't see it in the text.
For one, God doesn't accept doing that astrology and witchcraft crap.
Right.
So they can't use that. So
Well,
in my-
he's saying that about Babylon. He
Yeah.
believes it's it's literal Babylon, and he's saying this is about this Babylon essentially, that when it comes. So this is all future, premillennialist, the idea before the 1,000-year reign of Christ. This is after a supposed rapture. This is down the road. He's telling us essentially that it's going to come from this ancient Babylon that's going to be revived, and it's going to be all these different things. Now it talks about just a little bit of things about Babylon here in the text, but the idea that he's talking about, it's going to be about black magic, and they're going to be doing demon contact and seances, really shows you that the idea that a lot of these guys have a pretty good imagination. In other words, there's no way we're going to come to that conclusion in the text or the whole of the book of Revelation. The idea that you're just sort of have a very good imagination. You're writing all kinds of things in there. There's nothing you can really prove that's the case in there.
Do they ever bother to study the text to see
Yeah.
what it really means?
Well, he, like a lot of premillennialists, basically were probably brought up in a church that believed in premillennialism to some extent, and so they operate off of the same sort of. So imagine you're being taught premillennialism, and then you go to study the book of Revelation, and what text do you study? You study from other premillennialists, and so you basically have theirs, and you throw your stuff in there, and then later on somebody else writes a book about premillennialism or the book of Revelation, so he has these ones that you had, and then he has, Hal Lindsey stuff, and then he takes that and he writes his book about,
brainwashed.
yeah.
So
So,
you can't really understand the truth because you got all these people
the pitfalls.
views that they have instead of learning the truth.
Yeah. So the pitfalls are, I think premillennialists, their problem is like they would say, well, all the stuff where it talks about the destruction of Rome and God's going to destroy them, all that, they're going to say, the way that you're sort of interpreting it, none of that happens that way. We know from history itself that that Rome doesn't have all kinds of cataclysmic type of things happen to them. They essentially become weaker and weaker, and really they're taken over by their enemies and essentially go out of existence. The problem with premillennialists is that in order to get it to essentially say there's going to be this great battle of Armageddon and all these things are going to happen, is that you have to believe that Jesus, I'm trying to think of the name for that, but the idea that Jesus, when he came to earth, failed to set up the kingdom. Okay, so the idea is does Jesus fail at anything that he did when he came to this earth? On the cross he said it is finished. So the idea that Jesus failed to establish the kingdom, okay, well, where do you get that in the scriptures? The idea that you're going to actually say that Jesus failed to accomplish the Father's will. He said he came to do everything the Father. So you have that. Then you have to, in order to get really another kind of revived Rome, then you've got to have a rapture. The idea that you're going to have some kind of deal where saints are up in heaven, and then you have the tribulation period where this revived Rome comes into place, and then the saints are going to come back. It's going to be the Battle of Armageddon. You have to manufacture and concoct so much stuff in order to have some kind of grand battle in the end. And it's better just to recognize that these are visions with symbols, and they're basically saying that Christ and Christians are going to be victorious over the enemies of Christians. Right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, it's kind of sad that like their credibility should be shot, because aren't they the same people that said, the Antichrist is supposed to be Saddam Hussein? So
Right,
it's
so-
you call these people and then it turns out to be
Right.
wrong. That's just it.
Sure. Right, they just grab somebody else's name and say, well, we think it's somebody else.
Wrong,
Right.
wrong.
And so when they talk about the Antichrist, we never read it once in the book of Revelation. You've imported that from outside the book of Revelation and you put it in there, and you have really no justification. Like, how did you get there? Because the way that John talks about it in his epistles, the Antichrist is vastly different than the way premillennialists talk about the Antichrist. But that being said, we better get back into the text here. And so the angel wants to accommodate John and sort of explain these things. He's going to tell you the mystery of the woman, the beast that carries her. And so that is going to be explained to John in verses 8 through 18. So let's go ahead and read the last of this. So Ernest, would you like to do some reading? You want to read verses 8 through 12? And Jenna, do you want to read 13 through 18? Okay.
The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who live on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he is and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goeth to destruction. 12:2.
And then verse 12.
The 10 horns which you saw are the 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour.
These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the land, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth.
Okay. So I want to share with you just another premilist here, about verse 8 here. Is that John F. Walford, every prophecy of the Bible, clear explanation for uncertain times, by one of today's premier prophecy scholars, says, quote, the preferable interpretation, however, is either to regard the resurrection of the beast as the resurrection of the Roman Empire, or to consider the possibility of a deadly wound suffered in the assassination attempt from which he is miraculously healed by Satan. They're talking about the Antichrist. In either case, the world ruler comes on the scene as a miraculous person. So we're looking at this, and we're going to break down what's going on here. John is writing about, so the angel is telling him about the interpretation of the identity of the beast. We already know that the harlot is the city of Rome, and now we're going to find out who the beast is. And so we see here in the text that this beast is going to come out of the abyss. And so if you look up this word, in Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, it says that it is the world of the dead. It represents the abode of the wicked dead. So, you know, the idea that it's coming out of this place where all of the souls of the dead are, and he goes on to say that it goes to destruction here, and the Greek lexicon Art Gingrich says that this is talking about destruction, especially of eternal destruction, as punishment for being wicked. And so the idea that this beast is really, if it's aligned with a harlot, is wicked as well, is going to be punished the words, the beast that you saw was and is not, is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. When they see the beast that he was and is not and will come, are again describing the Nero alive myth. So I'm going to share with you again what that's about. But it was very popular in the day of John the Apostle. And Bob Winton, in his commentary, the outline commentary of Revelation, explains this myth. He says, one of the beast's 7 heads was mortally wounded. So he's talking about there in Revelation 13, but recovered, much to the amazement of the world. Many interpretations are offered by commentators, but the best seems to be the one that identifies it with the death of Nero, who was the first persecutor of the church. The resumption of persecution of the church under Domitian, there was a current theory that Nero would rise from the dead and resume his evil reign. The death of Nero in AD 68 resulted in confusion and anarchy in the Roman Empire for 2 years. There was no official persecution of the church by the Romans from the death of Nero until AD 81 AD, when it was resumed under Domitian. This is likely what is symbolized by the healing of the beast's head. It would cause the world to be filled with awe and amazement. So the idea is they just thought that Nero was going to come back. The idea that this guy was a really bad guy, he was responsible for persecuting Christians. Well, there were rulers after Nero, but none of them persecuted Christians. And then we have this guy Domitian comes into play, and all of a sudden people are saying, this is Nero, he's been brought back from the dead. And of course, we find this maybe hard to believe, maybe in modern times, but people were very superstitious. You know, I mean, you think about the apostles back in ancient times when they saw Jesus come walking on the water. Who did they think it was?
A ghost.
They thought it was a ghost. Is there such thing as a ghost? Of course not. So the idea is that was something that was popularly believed, but wasn't reality. Of course, Jesus told them, do not be afraid. It is I. And so we're talking about the idea that they actually believed, and so this is used in Revelation sort of to, not as truth, but the idea is this is coded language in really supporting the idea that persecution was back on, and now it's being carried out by the hands of the current ruler, or the emperor, which is Domitian. Remember that the word or the phrase, those who dwell on the earth, is a descriptive phrase of God's enemies. That was used in Revelation 11:10, 13:8, and verse 14. Now it's here in this chapter, 17, verse 2 and verse 8. And so only the ungodly would worship the emperor as God. And so what we have here is those who dwell on the earth are wondering as they witness Nero's myth come true in this this vision. And so this is being used for the benefit of of not really coming out and saying Domitian. The idea is here's this myth and it comes true, supposedly. I did want to draw attention to, again, another phrase written in the Book of Life. And again, if you're in premillennialism, the idea is they don't believe there's an actual book. There's no actual book. But it's a comforting thought, the idea that there is a book that God keeps that really has names of it. You call it maybe a divine roll call of all the names, essentially, of those who are faithful Christians that are going to go to heaven. Again, if you take the book of Revelation very literal, you have to concede that there must be such a book, but it's not meant to be taken. The idea that God knows those who are essentially his people, and they're the ones that are going to go to heaven. The foundation talked about here is from the foundation world. The idea is that God knew in advance who those would be that essentially are going to have eternal life. God, because he is omniscient, he knows all things, and those names of those that he knew was going to be saved for all of eternity are going to be in that book. Okay? So verse 9 says, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And so we get the explanation, but we have to sort of understand the phrase here. Here is the mind which has wisdom. And the theological dictionary of the New Testament says, quote, the author John believes his readers have both this special understanding and also true wisdom. Revelation 13 verse 8, here is wisdom, 19 verse 9. Revelation 17 verse 9, here is the wisdom which, or here is the mind which has wisdom, is to be understood in the same way. This wisdom is displayed to the reader in the exposition of the vision in Revelation 17 verses 8 through 18. In both cases then, Sophia, or wisdom, is the knowledge which is reserved for Christian confessors and which enables them to perceive the true meaning and ramifications of the events which were taking place on earth in their day. In other words, they understood this. They had the ability to understand all of the symbols, everything that was being said. We struggle at it because we don't always have the full understanding that we can go back to the Old Testament to bring these things out. They had an advantage in terms of understanding everything to where it didn't need all kinds of explanation because they understood the symbols, the imagery, all of that sort of thing. He's saying they possess that ability to understand it. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, the 7 heads and all that, and the 7 and 5 kings. Verse 10 says, and they are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. Damon R. Duck is a premillennialist. His book Revelation, God's Word for the Biblically Inept, says the 7 heads are 7 kingdoms because history and scripture revealed that there have been 7 Gentile world kingdoms. 5 have fallen. 5 have fallen are the 5 Gentile world kingdoms. What do we got here? We got a page out of order here. Whoops. What happened here? Okay. I got an extra page in there. I'm
Hey, Dad.
sorry.
Dad.
Huh? Dennis.
Do you think America is one of the Gentile countries that may fall too? That because it's getting so wilder and wilder that I just don't understand it. It's getting wild out there in the world. It's
Right. Well, I mean, America has certainly showed itself that it's not a country that's devoted to God. I mean, all you have to do is, look at sort of what is being advocated for our society. America's not really dealt with in the book of Revelation, other than in a very general way. The idea is that, the righteous are going to be blessed and the wicked are going to be punished. So you think about, just from America's standpoint, the idea that America was never really a truly Christian nation, but we understood our founding was based on God, that we ought to recognize God, that our morality was based on the morality of the Bible. And now all of a sudden we have people essentially relegating the Bible to the trash can because it's a very controversial book, and the idea that it's religion. So controversial, the idea is it says things people don't like in terms of morality. The idea that it's religion, we can't have religion in a secular society, so we can't use that.
You're trying to stamp it out.
And when we don't have the Bible as our moral guide in life, well, then you can abort babies, and you can become transgender, and you can get drunk, and you can commit adultery, and you can do all these things because you've just thrown away really your moral code. I mean, that's the code that we're to live by, is really the scriptures. And even though the Bible talks about Romans 13 that we've got to obey the government, that's only in terms of them trying to keep peace and stability. That is outside the Bible. In other words, God has sort of given them a role in sort of the criminal justice system. Somebody robs you, they're going to get arrested, they're going to be prosecuted, but the government has no authority in the realm of morals or religion. So when the government says, hey, we're going to legalize the lottery, we're going to legalize smoking marijuana, they don't have any authority to do that. And so the people just sort of look at it and say, well, the government said it's okay. Yeah, but are they our moral guide for our lives? Or they have that kind of moral authority that essentially says, despite what the Bible says, we're gonna legalize it, which means acceptance. So,
That's because like the last place I was living was like wow, and I couldn't believe that some of the things that were happening.
Right.
And I said, I gotta separate myself from some of this stuff. This is just not cool. And so I got out of there.
right,
But it's not just one building. It's multiple places that I've traveled in my travels throughout the state
Right.
and other states.
Right.
That are just. I don't think we can stand very much longer.
right,
This country.
Yeah.
That's my
Well,
personal opinion.
right. Well, and it's not only just our country, but for instance, LGBT stuff, we give other countries that we're connected with them support, aid in poorer countries, third world countries. But in order for them to be able to take the money, they have to essentially become advocates for LGBT stuff. In other words, even though a society that they disagree with it, they don't promote in their society. If they want our money, then essentially they have to decriminalize it and essentially, have acceptance.
Has Jay Biden and them made it that way? Since been
They've
in
done
there?
it. I think it's, I'm not sure how far back this goes, but certainly
Obama,
they
maybe.
have tied it to the money. In other words, before, they may have said, we'd like to see these changes in your culture. Now it's sort of like if you take the check, you make the change. And to their credit, there has been some African nations that have said, keep your money. Because in their culture, they don't do stuff like that. And just the fact that our country would say is, no, we've accepted it. We want you to take this garbage in your community. In order for you to take this garbage, you want the money, you promote the garbage.
That's scary.
Yeah.
And so there have been countries that said, keep your money. Even though it's a lot of money, they've turned it around because they don't want that in their country. And that's to their credit. Yeah. Let's get back here to talking about this. So we're talking about how the premillennials talk about 5 fallen Gentile nations. I really kind of want to look at it from the biblical perspective. You remember that it talks about the 7 heads or 7 mountains. This becomes tricky because there's something called biblical numerology. In other words, the numbers don't always represent what the face value is. In other words, in biblical numerology, the number 7 is best thought of as either sacred or perfect. It's not necessarily meant to be 7, okay? And so when we look at the idea of the 7 heads or the 7 mountains and the 7 kings, we may be just talking about something more in terms of a perfect amount of these things, okay? And it appears that the 7 heads, now if we look at this from a literal sense, which makes it just a little bit easier to maybe connect the dots, if we look at the 7 as a literal 7, then we understand that the city of Rome is built on 7 mountains. So that place is, again, Babylon, the city of Babylon, okay, the great city is the city of Rome. How are we to understand the mention of the 7 kings? Well, some brethren take this to mean 7 literal emperors of Rome, and so they'll mention Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 8, because he's going to talk about 8. So we're talking about these, the actual literal emperors of Rome. Others believe the 7 heads may represent the totality of the power personified in the emperor, or symbolic of the Roman emperors themselves as a whole, as an evil power opposed to God. The more we press this to really try to really get literal, the harder it seems to be. The idea that maybe this is more sort of a representation of imperial Rome through the emperors probably might be better. It talks about here the 5 have fallen, so we're looking at those kings, which are the emperors. If we interpret it that way, the number 5 and 10 became the symbol of perfect or complete. And so the idea of the most complete number, okay? Many who take the 7 kings as 7 literal emperors understand that Augustus through Nero are the 5 emperors that have fallen. They make Emperor Vespasian the one who is ruling, and they make the Emperor Titus, who is to succeed him, as the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a while. In other words, the more literal the idea is now you end up with Titus sort of reigning at the time, and when this is written, about 96 AD, Titus doesn't reign from that. I think I wrote down the time Titus essentially reigns from 79 to 81 AD. So you're going to run into troubles trying to sort of make it an exact fit. Okay? Let's go on to verse 11. It says, and the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So this is where you get, really, you're really working hard to really understand this. This, because the angel is not necessarily saying, well, this is talking about so-and-so, and this is talking about this one, and this giving us that kind of clarity. Now, they would have been able to figure it out just because they understood this language or this, apocalyptic sort of messages a whole lot better than us. We're left to sort of struggle, but that we understand really the overall message of the book of Revelation. So whether or not we can always get every single detail clear shouldn't really discourage us. Now I want to share with you, before I give you verse 11 and work on the interpretation, Damon Arduck, premillennialist, in his book Revelation, God's Word for the Biblical F, says here, the beast who once was and now is not, is the Antichrist. Again, I'm like, if I was with this guy, I'd be like, show me where it says Antichrist. You've imported that from the epistles of John, you brought it there. So you're really, in terms of your interpretation skills, you're not trying to interpret within the book. You're actually importing stuff from other places to bring that in there.
Who was and is the Antichrist, right?
Well, he's saying it's the Antichrist. And he says, the quote continues, he said, he is an 8th king or kingdom. He belongs to the 7, means he will be one of the 7 already mentioned. Since he is yet to come, he must come out of the 7th Gentile world kingdom, which will be the revived Roman Empire. If you don't know what the revived Roman Empire is for these guys, it's the European Union. Okay? As an 8th king, he will take over the 7th Gentile world kingdom and establish his own brand of world government, a new world order. The Antichrist will rise to power in the government, take over, and transform it into a satanic state. This is really pushing it, trying to come up with this. But I want to go and sort of look at it from within the context of Revelation. And if one interprets this verse accepting that the 7 kings are actually the above mentioned 7 emperors of Rome, then the interpretation would be as follows. The beast which was and is not is Nero, who has died. He was the first Roman emperor to persecute Christians. He wasn't the first emperor, but the first one to really have an all-out persecution against Christians. Okay, where did I leave off here? After he died, persecution by the Roman state ceased until Domitian came around. Domitian, who is the 8th of the list, the numbers I gave you, the 8 emperors, was considered by many to be the Nero alive again, the fulfillment of that myth. And since persecution under him resumed, therefore he is equivalent to one of the 7 emperors before him, which is implying Nero. I know it sounds very confusing. If you have any questions about it, please ask me. Yep, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and technically wasn't Domitian worse than Nero?
Yeah, because it seemed like Nero was more, his persecution really was within Rome, where Domitian, the idea is it seems to go beyond that, really to, everyone who's, in the empire. Certainly, if we're looking at the 7 churches of Asia, they're in modern day Turkey, so it's far beyond that, yeah. Dennis.
Isn't that like saying the world is wrong and I'm right?
Yeah, obviously this guy, and the thing about it is, this emperor worship was something that, some of the emperors sort of kind of supported, but they didn't push. Some didn't want to be as a god. Some sort of, were declared gods in a pagan sense after they died. But Domitian was a guy that really wanted to push the envelope. In other words, I believe I'm a god, and you will worship me as God, so there will be a bust in your community of my head, a statue of me. There will be a little altar before me. Everyone in the community will be brought out. They'll get some incense. You'll put it on that little altar, and you'll make the statement that Caesar is Lord God. And if you do that, everything's going to be good in your world. But if you refuse to do that, bad things are going to happen to you. Yeah, bad things. So the idea, like John, he was banished to Patmos. The idea that Christians would be arrested. The idea that there was economic discrimination. The idea that you wouldn't be able to buy or sell in the marketplace. And of course, we read about all the blood. The idea of all the bloodshed as a result of disobeying the order to worship the emperor. Okay, we are in a tight spot without going much further. Does anybody have any questions? I know some of the stuff that we've gone through has sort of been kind of difficult to really understand. I'm hoping overall that you're sort of understanding. If we understand the harlot, remember, is the city of Rome. The beast, is going to be the sea beast of Revelation 13. That is the imperial Rome with the emperors. And so the idea that you have this whole entity of evil coming together really throwing their weight around to persecute Christians, okay? And they rule the world, and they're an evil power.
He is seeing the future, but in visions. So he's interpreted to the Christians that were alive with him.
Right. All these visions applied to them in their time.
Not now.
Not now.
Okay.
No, not now like us.
Right.
He's seeing the end time.
Yeah, we're in the end times. We've been in the end times since Christ sent him back to heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he sees the final affair of mankind. This is what I'm saying. But he's translating the visions to the people of his time.
Right.
With what they're familiar with.
Right. So all of these are for their benefit because they're the ones suffering at the hands of Imperial Rome. And so this is why they're showing these imagery and sort of the idea that God is going to put them into destruction. They're going to pay for their evil and how they've had an immoral influence on the world and how they persecuted God's people and the Lamb. Yeah, they're going to pay a price for it. The application for us today would be looking at it from the standpoint is that, one day, depends on how our government is going. We tend to be going more to sort of more a state that wants more and more control over the lives of people. And, the idea that if you don't accept certain things, so I can think, some of the stuff that we've heard about, for instance, there's ministers in Canada who have preached against homosexuality, have been arrested, put in jail. Why? Because it's hate speech. So, the idea that the government wants everybody in society to conform, and at some point they're going to want Christians conform, and they're going to have to do whatever it takes to bring them in line, which means some kind of persecution, threats of jailing, whatever it is. And the application would be is we ought to stand tall, just as they stood tall in dealing with the great persecution of Rome. The application would be is we ought to be able to be ready to be faithful unto death, even if our own government now turns on us and says, you will do this, when we know we can't do that in terms of our Christian walk. So that's how we sort of would make the application today. I mean, it's really the idea, the resolve that no matter what, we're going to be faithful to Jesus. You can threaten to take away what we have. You can threaten to throw us in jail. You can threaten to kill us. guess what? We're not renouncing Christ. And essentially, we're called on to be faithful unto death, and that's really the encouragement. So, that's about all the time we have. I want to thank for those who may see this video later. Hope there'll be encouragement to you as you strive to live for Christ. God bless you.